We're live. I'm with the producer and the director, but I'm sort of acting like one, thanks to Michael Galinsky's help. Good evening. This is TMS Roundtable Global. We're live weekly. And this week, I happen to be on this side of the globe, East Coast, USA, Eastern Standard Time. And it's 8 o'clock Monday night. And it's usually I can't go this time in America because I'm living in Israel, but I'm here visiting my family, and I was thrilled to come in on an evening where I can be one-on-one with Michael Galinsky and get his attention. You've been really, really busy, and it's not just about bananas. You've been really, really busy. So, Michael, first tell us what you've been up to, and then I've got some specific questions for you. But what have you been doing with this?
It's mostly the following the Savannah Bananas around the U.S. and working on a series about them.
And what's special about these guys?
The Savannah Bananas are a baseball team that is changing baseball. It's making it faster, more fun, more exciting, and they're consistently changing rules to adapt to what's working and not working. And I think it's really interesting because they are doing intentionally innovative and paradigm shifting work, and it's kind of interesting to observe. And they've turned it into a phenomenon. So they went from from nothing to now having at least 10 million social media fans. So 7 million fans on TikTok, a couple million on Instagram. And it's just so that it's a phenomenon. It's just wild to observe and be there. It's like being on tour with a rock band that has a hit record.
No way. I mean, what drew you to these particular people?
We made a short piece about them for ESPN, and that actually blew them up. They did like 40 times their normal t-shirt sales, and it continued. So then we pitched a series about them to ESPN, and then that happened last year. Wow. And this year we're just kind of doing it with them, probably for their YouTube.
Great. Because I know you don't take on projects that don't give you meaning. I hope so. I saw this and it took here.
Yeah, it was really horrendous. Supportive, and made it difficult. And so this year we're kind of really hard, but a lot more free.
So, when I ask, I feel like, not only have I seen you with hot in your ears, and I've seen you in chronic pain, been able to overcome, been able to accept these situations, this chronic pain, see it as your anxiety body, and not react to it like maybe you were in the movie. And occasionally you'll get these symptoms. I have ringing in my ear, and I just, so I want to continue of how, because there are people and their pain levels dropping. There are people that are seeing your movie and feel better, but there are a lot of people who are just working, Michael, and it's not about working hard, because I want to talk to the people and all the journaling and everything, but they're just not getting what they need to address that.
Yeah, I was actually thinking a lot about it. In kind of a healing journey was book, there's a lot of discussion of empathy, and I was on a trip with my mom, and the thing are connected to someone and live with someone, it's complicated, right? Because you want to have empathy for them, aspects of their ability, because the anxiety demands a certain level of self-focus. It can be very difficult. Mother, who also was controlling and subtle, But if you cross the ways threatened, you would you would feel that response.
So yeah, let's talk about you in relationship to your anxious mother.
I'm talking about, which is that I went on this trip with and my daughter, two very anxious people, and it would be rough reading the book, and it's just talking a lot about empathy and recognize someone's anxious and you're resisting, going to get more anxious.
More anxious.
Right. And so what I'd learned to do was to, but still holding a space of self-protection, because you just don't know what's going to happen. Because she was like, well, do we rent this car? One you're most comfortable with. And I just saw it just kind of soften. Matter that much. So it will start to match or come down to that energy.
So what were you thinking? Making me feel anxious. I'm going to have some symptoms. How do
I was just the opposite. I was just thinking, oh my God, it must be so hard. Thinking of how do I protect, able to be present and accepting of it, diminished significantly, and we had a really excellent trip. And
yeah. So what you learn about yourself? You have normally reacted maybe years ago.
I would have been. I would have done what she needed, but I would have been self-protective without realizing it. And so, to let down the self-protection worked. And so, just continuing to do that.
You trusted something, like there was a decision you had to make, and you trusted something. You somehow trusted something.
That it was worth an effort to hold. It's really hard to even recognize. So, like, say if you have to deal with people who are really, they're not going to be very good at listening or opening up to bickering or fighting about nonsense. Each of you trying to establish ground.
Right.
And it's then there's this thing, right? So if you have these you can try to do better, and the other person doesn't. The rest of your life, you can recognize this person anything. Mm-hmm. Like, if they're going to be completely, that's not my responsibility, and I don't have to deal with them. Mm-hmm.
Do you think that, Michael, you self and knowing yourself? I feel like there's some ego there. Like you didn't let your ego run. It was like,
it wasn't right or wrong. It was just not. Like, sometimes we'll just, if you're in a, see, you just go, okay, whatever. You kind of adjust to that, and that seems fine, but you're actually giving something up. And say what you think is a better idea or what you need in order to. What's the best way to do it? You don't have to be angry, gently, and say, hey, this, it doesn't seem to be really working so well. Recognize that you're stressed about this, but like, if you could be a little more aware of that space to hear what I'm saying about it and how it affects.
Right.
Not always easy.
Right.
And it doesn't always.
This was a good example. Any of the shows, because I remember this conversation.
Yeah, it was a real turning point.
More about even when you were going through your highest pain, meeting Sarno and what was it for you that, if you would recommend a few things, like what to not only help your anxiety, but to keep your physical symptoms in touch with, like, how are you keeping in touch with your unconscious mind? How are you keeping repressing?
Yoga. And for a while, I was doing a lot more meditation, but for me, I do times a week, and it's kind of a meditation practice. I really commit myself to that hour, myself back to checking in on both the postures, but also. And the thing about yoga is it's and emotional.
Yeah. In what way is it emotional for you?
The whole goal of it is to. So it's not just for me. I mean, that is the nature of yoga. It's to yoke yourself to the earth and to your body. So you're integrating with these stretches will release feelings, and you'll be like, whoa. The more you do it, the more you recognize that, and the more done meditation, you feel your whole body is more relaxed in your body after yoga.
Yeah. And let me just be. I wanted to say to you, but we knows we have to, be feeling, and because when we know we're feeling, judgment isn't a feeling, anger. What do we do with the feeling then?
So we accept, suppress that feeling, but we also remind ourselves that it's a series of patterns, emotional feelings. Sometimes you have grief because a close have grief, and sometimes we'll feel like grief isn't okay. We've talked about it before, but I still have some struggle. I had a virus on Thursday, and it kind of for a week and working heat, and I woke up, and so my last night was Wednesday night, 11 o'clock at night.
Wow.
And my plan was I was going to take that day off and then go shoot the following day. I was going to drive somewhere, going to another game. I just can't do it. I was exhausted, and I slowly began to feel not well. And then we for lunch, and I felt it was a delicious hot dog. But after and I realized it was more. I was worried I maybe had alpha gal from getting bit by a tick a month ago, which stressful. And then I got that. We went out to dinner. I couldn't eat because I was really not feeling well. Up, we were driving back to the house on a windy road, and I was like, "You have to stop the car, lose whatever is in my body."
Yeah.
And I did that very vigorously. Wow. And I didn't feel better, but at least that was over.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting is I was, that night I was really not well. I had a fever, and I just felt really unwell. And I kept. I'm trying to process it. I think we had a kind of a important conversation in the morning that had brought some stuff up. I feel like the sadness, and I was upset that I wasn't able to process it. Last night, I was talking to my cousin. I was thinking about your dad on his birthday, which was Thursday.
Did you cry?
No, but I'm about to now. But
I think I want to.
It was like I knew it. My body knew it, but I was so tired. I hadn't checked in. I hadn't noticed. I hadn't remembered. And it's really interesting because there's still some work to heal that. And part of it is just being okay with that. But even still, like when it comes up, it's it's like it's the impulse is you want to cough or whatever. But so when's the appropriate time? When's not the appropriate time? It's when you won't be able to repress it and it'll come up. And was the next day I wrote about sadness, and the day after that I wrote something else, and then it was like, oh, of course, it makes birth. And I think that there's really deep connections between birth and death. I think that connections that bring me to the conclusion that those exist outside of time, and that may make no sense, but I've told you this other story where it was my sister's birthday, and someone was giving away an iPod in her neighborhood for her birthday, and I said, "Happy birthday! You're 50. How old are you?" She's like, "I'm not 50." Went home. There was someone who was giving away an iPod on the local listserv. I said, "Great, I'll come get it." And that was 8:00. But my wife was putting one kid to bed, and the other didn't want me to leave. So finally, it was 9:15, and I went on a walk to go pick up this iPod. And as I was walking, I realized I was arriving at the spot where my father was hit by a car at the moment that my sister was born.
It was by the basketball stadium.
Yeah, it was right. It was at that intersection where he was hit. Where he was hit. It was not around it. It was at that corner. And then the iPod wasn't there. Somebody on me, the motherfucker.
So wait a minute. Let's not get off topic. So basically, you got sick. You went through it. You understood the feeling, but it wasn't like it turned chronic. And then you were okay.
I was just right. I had to fly the next day, and I did it. But yeah, here's the thing is, I did have moments of like, oh, will I be able to fly? And I said, if I can't fly, I can't fly. We'll figure it out.
You weren't fighting reality because what happens is people start to fight the reality. They start to fight. You folded into. I'm having diarrhea. I'm going to throw up. Like I'm going to just fold into this and see and let whatever comes up. And you were open to like whatever.
But I was sicker than I'd been in a really.
Yeah.
And so I made it through the night, and then but that's the thing is I wasn't. Why am I going to be able? And I just kept. This is the other thing. So you say, what is something that heals you? Is you notice when you're getting worried about something that you cannot control, and you go.
Say it again. When you notice that you're worried, not control.
Then stop.
Yeah.
It's not helping you. And I'm much
How does somebody stop? By being
and literally using your brain, your cortex, saying it out loud. There's nothing I can do about this. So what does it matter?
Yeah.
That there's just so many experiences where acceptance also. As I was starting to really work on this acceptance process, which was related to having done, another major tool, as you know, is the presence process. Yeah. It's not over time because we have a lot of untraining to do. A lot of people will say, "Oh, I immediately got better," right? Things will come back up.
Yeah.
But I think it's a lifelong process once you decide to start healing to continue to heal.
Yeah.
And I'm also didn't do that. They really did not deal with the things that felt
they weren't self-reflective people.
No, and they came up in an era of leads to even greater trauma in their children, right? Because they're just passing on
intergenerational trauma.
Weirder because you're like, well, I didn't grow up in the war. My parents weren't killed in the Holocaust. But if their parents' relatives were, it's going to still come down through those generations. And, we think, oh, well, I didn't have it. But you have the disadvantage of not really understanding it or remembering it or being able to process it. So it's even more difficult process of healing. And I think that's where the acceptance process comes in. Once where I was like, everything went wrong. I was supposed to go get it. I was going to take the bus to the train, and the bus never showed up. So I started walking, and then it started to rain. Made it to the train. I made it still with an hour to spare, and the lines were out the door.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I never carry it back. Never, because I don't want to have to deal with it.
Yeah.
I was getting ready to just leave this guy being yelled at by everyone. And I just walked up and said, listen, I know this is not your fault, and people are really not being nice to you. I wonder if you can help me. He opened a new line because he's like, because just if you treat people, if you don't transfer that to them, especially people who it's not their fault, and they have no control.
Yeah.
Although I have a little bit. Yeah. And so he took that little bit of control.
Another way that you stopped, you took a moment. You took a moment, maybe even less than a moment. You stopped and you said, I'm stressed out. I could miss my train or bus, whatever. Here's an opportunity where I can practice, put into practice. Like I tell people, when you're in pain and when you are, is your opportunity. It's an opportunity. And you keep mentioning opportunities where you could have either had some pain, had some symptoms, freaked out, been pissed, been angry, and
any what we call symptoms of pain or physical symptoms beyond anxiety. But I was able to say, okay, I accept this, and then the anxiety helps you let go of the symptoms.
Right.
And, it's interesting. When I was sick the other night, like my foot was really bothering me. The things always go, and it's still a little bit sore. It's like it wants to be tight, and it's like, okay, I just have to it's going to take a few days to unwind. Because when you're in a weak place, those things will arise. Yeah. And again, that's where I just was like, okay, this is uncomfortable. Pass when this passes.
Right. And I want to say on the record about awareness, because we're talking about awareness. Awareness is chemical. I mean, Dr. Hanscom says awareness is loving yourself. It's being kind to yourself. It's being patient. And that's a chemical. And on that note, I'd like you to answer this question. So a lot of people, of course, when their sensations go down, because this is what they're looking for. And I'm always like, please don't make that your goal. But this is also, look, you can want the sensations to go down, but that can't be your only goal. How about that you're getting better at feeling? But what happens with people is they'll have less sensations, but then they'll have more anxiety. And I always think, like, maybe you have to, at this point, is that the way it has to be, that when the sensations go down? Because it's kind of the way it is. You're going to be living with yourself. And that may be physical sensations, but you're going to be having coffee with your feelings. And that may be more uncomfortable. And do you want to choose? And I'll choose my feelings. But some people are like, I'll take the pain back.
Right. Well,
about that?
It's all a process. It just is like you get a little more, you lapse back in, because all of this is also patterned behavior. They're patterns that we learn in childhood to be safe. They're patterns that are inscribed in our genes to make us feel safe or to keep us safe.
They can change.
Changes. Now, the thing is also to give yourself grace. It's going to change, and you're going to build resilience. And like with my foot, my foot was bothering me the other night when I was really sick, which compounded everything. But when you're at your weakest, those patterns will reappear very quickly. Even though, like, say you're moving, and you've been doing a great job of healing, and all of a sudden you have to go through, say you're moving in the midst of a divorce, right? Grace. Things are going to be hard. The main thing to do is notice, oh, I'm doing that thing. But also, like, say you're on this healing journey with a partner, right? It's to give each other grace, but also give the other person grace, and also grace by, hey, I notice you're doing that thing that you do when you're stressed out. That sometimes the response is, how dare you? Can't you see how stressed I am? Why are you bringing that up now? You always do that. It's like, well, because it's affecting me. It's having an impact on my ability to communicate with you. So I'm simply saying, I notice you're doing that, and that's making it hard for us to communicate, as we're seeing right now, right? Like, because of the way you're being so reactive. So the more that you can do that without being, like, recognize, you say, hey, I recognize I'm feeling a little angry. So that's helping me to realize that something I really want to address with you. Could you give me a moment to listen for just a moment?
Yeah.
It's always about have accountability in what you're asking for. And also ask yourself, wait, is this reasonable? Or is this really about me? So sometimes we'll flip the script and we'll be like, oh, you're doing this thing that's driving me crazy and I'm mad at you. It's like, I recognize that thing you're doing is hard for me. And I'm not saying it's all about you. Instead, I'm telling you this because I think it will help you. Or if someone's complaining to you about someone else, right? Someone's saying, oh, I can't believe my friend does this, this, and this, and this, and this. And I just want them to do it differently. I was like, you're saying is completely reasonable. But I recognize that you have a profound kind of righteousness about the way you feel about it. So if you could check that and be aware of it as you present it to them, it might help that conversation flow.
Well, and or you could have said, if you said that very nicely, or you could have said, well, something you don't like about someone else, usually you have that quality. You could have said that.
Right. Well, yeah, but that's just like throwing a rubber ball against the wall.
No, exactly.
Hit you back in the face.
So yoga, awareness to me is such an incredible
and acceptance.
And I want to say on the record, you were going to call All the Rage, All the Acceptance, but you didn't think it was going to sell in the box office. Is that true?
No, we were going to call it. We were going to call it Story of Pain. Actually, is what it was.
Story of Pain.
The Story of Pain, but it just was like it was a negative thing, whereas All the Rage is both positive and negative.
It took me so many years to really get that title because not everybody's having rage, but when it comes down to it, it's even
what's trending, what in clusters, right? Because it's the mind will latch on to what's acceptable or what's a good distraction. It goes in waves.
But even if we're fearful, which is the main emotion that's processed in the amygdala, we can be angry at ourselves for being fearful. Like the anger is really big. It's big. I wouldn't think it was one of the most important ones. I mean, I would think all the fear, but then we begin judging ourselves for being fearful. So then we're back to the anger and the rage. So yoga, which I think is profound. I mean, they're doing a lot of research about Qigong as an incredible exercise for centering, building your Qi, literally healing, like sending cancer cells the other way. I mean, it's unbelievable, the research on Qigong and any kind of exercise. And Sarno said, just get back to exercise. I mean,
move. Right.
So, what do you think about the journaling? Because a lot of people are having a lot of success with that. Some people are throwing the book across the room. Some people are like, it's getting me more triggered. What is your take on journaling?
I find it useful at times and not useful at times. And so like I guess, so for me, the journaling seems less useful. But what's interesting is around the time that we started to work on All the Rage again, I resolved to become a better writer. And I'd always been interested in writing, but never put in the 10,000 hours. And so I started trying to write every day. And so for me, part of the process of making the movie was figuring out how to be kind of like present enough, right? How can we write in a way that's personal, but not so personal that it becomes a request for sympathy, but it makes space for empathy. So it's trying to find that sweet spot. And so for me, I do like one of the things I do, as an artist, is I try to I do a lot of Instagram posting, and what I'm doing is I'm trying to combine words with images in a way that I started when I was in my 20s, but I didn't really do anything with that work because I wasn't confident enough in it yet, and I wasn't sure what it was. But I feel pretty confident what it is now. And for a long time, for like 8 or 9 years, I was doing tons of blog posts, and they would be long and sprawling.
Mm-hmm.
The really kind of cool thing about Instagram for me is that it has a limit.
Yeah.
Most people don't go anywhere near the limit in terms of how much you write, but it's like 3 or 4 paragraphs.
Right.
And I've kind of gotten to the point where I just hit that limit. I write in that space. It's almost like, a kind of a poetic form where you have a very specific amount of space. And sometimes I'll finish and I'll be like, and I'll type one more word and it'll be like, you've overdone it.
Mm-hmm.
But the way that I'm doing it is I'm trying to think, how could I write about this that's emotionally present, somewhat naked, almost on the line of feeling, is this too personal? Like, is it?
But isn't that the goal, to be personal with yourself? Isn't that to have this conversation with yourself through the words?
It is, and I think that part of the problem is sometimes for some people who say they don't get much out of the journaling is it's hard, even harder in a weird way, to go deep. You start to spin your wheels in terms of your story, and you're just repeating the story that you've been telling yourself all along, rather than working to change your story by challenging yourself to communicate it to other people in a way that isn't screaming, poor, pitiful me, but instead saying, hey, this is the struggle that I'm going through, and I think almost everyone is going through this, and if we're able to talk about it, we actually are then talking about it, which means we're not repressing it,
right?
And we're making space for other people to connect with it. And that was a really big thing for me when my mom was ill. I started writing about how that was for me, and I got just flooded with messages of how important it was to people because their parents had died or their parents were ill, and they didn't even know how to tell anybody because it felt like they would be complaining or whining. Or we just told, don't do that. And for them, it was so meaningful to feel heard, even though they hadn't said anything.
Yeah.
And so to kind of continue that process has been useful to me because it challenges me to stay present and to be with those emotions.
Well, we're grieving the rest of our life for our parents. So each time you write about your mom, it's an expression of grief that's not going to sit in your unconscious mind and cause hives.
Right. It's helping me to express it, but more importantly to me, it is validating. So the response I get is very validating that I've found that spot where I can be like I did. Like, remember I told you the very first time we showed All the Rage, someone's like, wow, that was so brave of you to be so naked. And I was like, well, it didn't feel that brave until people started to react to it really negatively.
Right.
You goddamn narcissistic asshole.
How did you make yourself the star?
Yeah, it's like, but
Michael, you know, good PR is, even negative PR is good PR.
No, it didn't help. It actually really turned people off. They're like, for people who were like, I don't want to have to watch that, it's a good way to be like, I don't have to watch that.
Yeah.
So, that was the trouble.
I'm going to interrupt you. Michael, your movie has laid a foundation in this profession and in this field that has changed the face. I mean, All the Rage was the first movie. Then This Might Hurt. This is how I go. Then Love Heals, which is a phenomenal step. And now Pain Brain. You have no idea. Like, do you know, like, I'm on the other side of All the Rage. You're on that side, and you have your Michael Galinsky point of view, and I have my Tova Goldfein point of view. But I'm letting you know, I'm out here in the field, with the therapists and with the clients. It has changed the face of how we understand chronic pain. Like, I'm just letting you know from my point of view. Okay, but I want you to respond to that for a minute. But I want to say something about journaling on the record.
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, it's not easy. And for that matter in itself, it's going to have benefits.
Right. Just like yoga isn't easy. It's like, it is the difficulty of it. But also, that's the thing, is like, this is what's so important about yoga is push yourself, not too much.
Exactly.
So
but
like,
if you go ahead.
And then you consistently are able to expand if you don't push too hard.
Right, because when do we learn unless we're out of our comfort zone? I mean, this is science. This is not. Right. This is the universal law of nature. And if we see we see journaling, we see Nicole Sachs, David Hanscom is like flying a kite all the time. Nicole Sachs, it's her life. So the journaling, it's actually the fact that it's not easy, and you go and you do a little bit every night, you don't have to write a whole paragraph, is the actual, you're literally healing, you're literally creating healing by going into the resistance, which is the name of the book by Alan Abbas. Come on, reach into the resistance. It's so profound when we're reaching into our resistance, because that's the healing. That's it. So it's almost an interesting thing to know yourself through the journaling. The second thing is, thoughts are killing us. Thoughts are not our enemies, but they are hurting us because of the way power we're giving them.
Right.
So when we take our thoughts from our brain, our mind, to the paper, this is now the science, we're releasing certain chemicals, and neurologically, the brain can easily come out of sympathetic into parasympathetic and calm the fuck down. Okay. So what I'm saying is that it has that effect, even though writing isn't fun, it's valuable. And if people can see it in that way and go into it and come out of it, I think it could really help people.
Yeah.
And
I didn't mean to dismiss the importance of it. What I'm trying to say is go at the pace that you can. So even with yoga, it's like you'll go in a class and some people can stand on one toe and, and bounce, and others can't touch their toes. Right. So what's the importance of yoga? What's the important aspect? What's the thing you need to do every day? Show up. And so it's like, what I'm saying is, if you're showing up for the writing and it's not happening, show up in some other way. Like, show up by meditating. You just
like go into the resistance in some way each day to prove that the resistance is just the word. It's not really, there's nothing really resisting you. It's just the fear or the unknown.
Yeah. And it's so complicated, because as we unpeel these layers, we realize, okay, oh, damn. I made it through that screen, and then I walked past that corner, and now here's this door. It just seems locked. And so you have to sit in front of that door for a while. And so we're just gonna continually go deeper and deeper in. And that's, deeper is not a bad thing. Deeper is more centered, more grounded, more able to kind of have peripheral vision on these things. And it's not easy. So you're saying there's a lot of people, like, yes, I know. There's a lot of people who just have so much trouble with it. Like I have a friend who's when she was a child, her mother tried to kill herself several times. And then when she was an adult and she had kids, her mother tried to kill herself very seriously. And then they saved her. And then when the kids were 2, she succeeded. Mm-hmm. And this friend has a lot of chronic illness, has ever since I've known her for 30 years. And she can be quite angry when we talk about, the mind-body part of it. Because here's the thing. It's never your mind. It's your mind-body. There's a physical thing happening, right? So even when I got sick, I'm thinking, what is going on emotionally? But also, I understood that something was going on physically. And maybe it was a virus. Or my cousin the other day just said, oh, well, they know now that ulcers are caused by bacteria, and they thought it was stress. But it's so silly, because it negates the idea that, well, what creates the possibility for that bacteria to thrive? Oftentimes it's a compromise.
What's causing the inflammation to,
Yeah, what's causing what's causing that situation? And oftentimes, so there's never a case where it's not. And when I'm talking about like these physical symptoms as being mind driven, it doesn't mean that the physical symptoms are not physical. They're symptoms. They are. No,
your body is reacting. Look, the brain does not differentiate between a psychological stress and a physical stress. So it's going to look.
Well, and
pain is an emotion. Pain is an emotion. It's physical things are.
Well, the definition of pain is a physical and emotional response, and is there physical and emotional response to tissue damage or the threat of tissue damage.
Right.
That's the definition of pain.
And I want to further say that physical pain, acute pain happens and it heals. It is not processed in the same place as chronic pain.
Right.
So we're talking about two different things. We're not talking about acute pain. People are not TMSers who are taking their antibiotics or taking their pills and getting better. Right. I'm okay with medicine. I'm okay with surgery. Just it should get you better. But when there's medically unexplained symptoms and you're in a chronic place and you're not getting better, this work will help you get better. Yeah. And like the patient I had, the woman I had on my show who went and got chemo, even though she knew her cancer was mind body. And she said, I'm going to go into this chemo and I'm going to call it chemo ecstasy. I'm going to come out of this being very aware. So I want to go back. Journaling is an expression. It's an expression. So whether you like it or not, I just want to keep tooting its horn of how even writing a story, writing a book, talking about your narrative. Like I think it's important to look at how writing can help us with our thoughts. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's what I mean. That's the purpose of the journaling part. And, of course, Sarno was very clear about like, this was something we need to do. So there is the awareness, there's the exercise, there's the journaling. What else is important for you? Like Sarno was like, it's very important that you accept 100% that this is psychological.
So that's important to recognize that the science and the biology of belief, right? So I have another guy I know who has a pain issue and pain disease, and he knows about Sarno and he watched the movie. He said, "But I don't buy it." I'm not going to help you then, And this is a person who's extremely anxious, and needs to control a lot of things. And if you don't look at that, you're not going to heal that. You're like, well, that's how I am. That's what's causing this problem. So maybe you want to shift how you are or who you are, because who you are is also, so there's this core sense of who we are. And then there's also all these layers of mishigas on top that are caused by our experiences and our relational upbringing. When we're able to kind of have empathy for those who kind of helped encode those things, we're able to have more empathy for ourselves. And that's the part of that story I was saying about A New Earth and my mom, is by having empathy for her, I was able to have a little more empathy for myself. And that empathy manifests as awareness, I guess. So,
yeah. Well, can I say it like this too? Is this what you're talking about? So we're clear. If you don't like a quality about yourself, or you don't like something that happened or some behavior you have, if you can accept that and understand it maybe came from some childhood stuff or relationship stuff or, some learned behavior, if you can accept that part of you that you're judging, you can transform that and move on from it. You're not a victim of your character.
Accepting it means not judging as much anymore. So letting go of judgment. Judgment is really, really...
it's toxic.
Yeah, that's the word that was...
It's toxic. Judging others and judging ourselves.
Right. So people who are judgmental feel righteous, and that righteousness feels strong, but it's also often the source of toxicity in a way, and it inhibits our ability. So, for instance, but what I was getting at kind of was that empathy part was I wasn't even aware of how tight I held myself around my mom. I just did what she said. I accepted whatever it was. Otherwise, there was conflict. But I wasn't even aware of how much that was going on. And so having empathy for her and getting that softening allowed me to have a little more empathy for, oh gosh, that's not so good to hold myself that way. That withholding was a repression.
Right.
That I didn't even see. I wasn't fully aware of. And so it's like, how do we unpeel those things and start to notice where we're repressing? And try to address it.
Right. No, it's very, very good points. There's a saying that you can't heal a body you hate. Mm-hmm. So number one, it's about, loving your body in pain and with cancer, autoimmune disease, because this is a relationship. This is the core. This is it. This is the next movie. Like, you got to accept what's going on. You cannot fight your reality. And once you accept that, you can change it.
Right.
You know? So
right, yeah, that which we resist will persist. It's
right.
You know, an age-old truth. And if we're in resistance, we're not going to be healing.
Right. So Susan, who's a lovely, lovely lady I work with, she said forgiveness is also very important. So, you know, I always talk about, you know, the knowledge, the journaling, the meditation, the physical exercise to do. Even if you're in pain, you got to teach the brain that your body can move without, like, it's just a conditioned response. So to go into a little bit of the movement slowly at your own pace, and then accepting that this is psychological. And I added 6 and 7, which is, you know, compassion, which is chemical, and forgiveness. Mm-hmm. And Susan is reading the book Forgive for Good by Fred Luskin, which David Hanscom talks about. And it's really about, it's also chemical forgiveness. And so I wanted to ask you, you know, about the compassion thing, and the love heals, and the compassion, the forgiveness, and the belief. Like, talk a little bit about the chemical nature of this, and that if we can love and accept ourselves and forgive and believe that we deserve to be better, that just turns into, that's like medicine. It's chemical. So that's what we're talking about here. But tell us more about how to move into that place more often by reaching into the resistance.
Well, I think so. It's like all that difficult stuff. Like forgiveness is tricky, right? Because a lot of times if we've had relational upbringing in which, in order to stay safe, we accept things that we really shouldn't. You can't not accept from your parents or whatever, but we get into a pattern of accepting things that we probably shouldn't accept. Demands within relationships, etc.
Wasn't that called survival mode?
It is, right, but that complicates forgiveness, right? Because oftentimes I think we will, acceptance and forgiveness are complicated, right? Because when you forgive and accept without awareness, what happens is you can get drawn into allowing those things to continue to happen. So it's figuring out how do you forgive and accept and still be able to hold boundaries that do keep you safe, right? Like limiting contact with someone. You can forgive them, but you don't have to live with them, right? You don't have to kind of deal with something. So, but I'm saying, like, for some people, there's confusion about what forgiveness and acceptance means. So acceptance doesn't mean staying in an abusive relationship, right? It's accepting that the abuse is not okay and leaving that relationship.
Right.
Like accepting that, okay, this is not safe, actually not physically safe for me.
Right.
And it's certainly not emotionally healthy for me.
Right.
I have to figure out a way out of this.
But is it, but how many, but look, there's so many people who, when they become aware that they can't forgive, it's because they're somehow still holding on to the anger.
Yeah. Right. And they're thinking that anger hates. I'm just trying to get into kind of a more weird, nuanced space where, like, people can get confused about, like, so even acceptance, meaning that you accept everything that happens to you. So acceptance means when something is beyond your control, right? You just have to figure out, okay, let me figure out what happens here. But there are situations in which, like, say you are in a job where there's an abusive boss. Acceptance doesn't mean staying in that job. It's accepting the reality that this job won't work and you're going to have to make some decisions that are difficult. Yeah. So it's accepting reality more than accepting bad actions.
Right.
And that can be confusing. Like, oh, I'm an accepting person. Sometimes it means that you're just repressing your own needs. And so finding those balances between all of these things is hard. Yeah. And making sense of them and recognizing what they mean truly in a more deeper emotional way for yourself. And I say this because, like, I'm continually uncovering different layers of that and trying to figure out, okay, how do I address that? And, well, in some places I've actually had to cut off contact with some people who asked too much of me because I couldn't figure out how to stop that from happening.
Right. Well, and I think that this is a really important key. This is a whole other topic, a whole other show, but taking responsibility for your shit, taking responsibility for your anger is so much more powerful for you. If you're going, I mean, like you're part of the forgiveness interaction.
Right.
You know, I was talking to an internal family systems person, and they were saying, God forbid, even someone gets raped, they're still responsible for their life after this trauma.
Right. Because it's easy to be like, well, that person ruined me. No, that person harmed you. But if you allow it to be overwhelming, or don't do the work to move through it, because it's not allow. I mean, sometimes if you don't seek the help that you need and take care of yourself, because we can't heal from these things, we know this. We have to recognize it, accept that, and work towards that healing process. It doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean it's automatic. It doesn't mean it's given. But we have to move and believe that we can heal. Number one, like you said, if you don't believe you're going to heal, you're not going to heal. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to talk about two really important things. You know, you met Gabriel Mattei, and I know he wasn't Gebar Matai. I know he wasn't the most friendly guest you had on the All the Rage, but, you know, I always repeat what he says about, you know, it's not about the trauma. It's about your experience of it. Because so many people are still, you know, still struggling to climb out of the, you know, the pot of mud because the quicksand, because of the trauma. And we're not here to judge anyone's trauma, big T's, little T's. But, you know, it is they do have a choice. Suffering is a choice. They do have a choice.
Yeah, and it's so complicated. So number one, my thing with Mattei was that I was just like, I asked him, did he have any colleagues who he might share the movie with? And he said, I don't have any colleagues. And at that point, I think he was really struggling to be heard, and now he's not. So he might be a very different person at this point.
Right.
But now I've forgotten the thing I was going to tell you. What were we talking about?
About the, you know, the experience, like how you're responsible for your experience of your trauma. Like you're traumatized, but if you're going to suffer the rest of your life because of the crap your parents did, and they did the best they can, then someone's got to be responsible and move. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like the trauma is what's keeping a lot of these people behind. And, you know, Rose and I discuss that a lot.
So the thing I think is really interesting is that, you know, all of these things exist on so many different levels and in ways that we're not so aware of, because they exist within ourselves, they exist within our family, they exist within our social sphere, our cultural sphere, and within the world. And we do have a collective understanding of the world, even if we have maybe oppositional views about that understanding. So we have a common language, if we speak the same language, but we all have language and we have ideas. And these ideas shape our whole culture. And I think, like, I've been thinking a lot about this, but like, so my parents' generation, who were born in the 30s, right, were born in the shadow of World War I, which was incredibly traumatizing. And then in their childhood, experienced World War II, which was incredibly traumatizing. And all of that, especially in America, on the shoulders of the Civil War, Jim Crow, racism, depression, all these, they had so much trauma. And so then we had the 50s, where we had this mass repression. Just 50s, we all know this is the decade of repression. We're just going to smile, and we're going to have economic power and a strong military. And the blowback from that was just this bloom of post-war trauma in post-war kids that we saw enacted in the 70s. And so we had this bloom of an opening up of essentially a trauma awareness decade that became the 80s, which was a trauma retreat decade. But all through that whole time, we had a medical system that was becoming increasingly biotechnical. So we were being told, science will solve everything, science will solve everything, science will solve everything. But science separated the mind and the body. Yeah. And I think that the 2020s will, in decades further, be known as the decade of trauma awareness. So we're reconnecting with that awareness. But that awareness is not just simply, we're all affected by trauma. But I think we need to look at the waves of it and why there's so much cultural repression and there's so much lack of awareness and what we can do about that. And so I think we need to cease looking at it on the individual level and start thinking of it quite a bit more on the cultural, social level. And we look at, the economic aspects of it and the increasing wealth disparity and the power disparity and, and the environmental problems. All these things are all playing in together. And it's, I think, trauma awareness and trauma work that will maybe start to heal all of these systems, or just fucked.
Well, Michael, don't you think, I mean, like, it's again, these are external things happening and we are affected by it, but we also have a choice there.
Yeah. No, but what I'm saying is, if I'm just speaking towards a greater awareness of how those other things impact it, so that's one of the things that makes it so much more difficult. Like, we're having this conversation now in a moment that we couldn't have imagined 3 years ago, even in terms of this, so just like the bananas are blowing up, right? The idea and awareness of trauma is on fire, right? And so all of the younger people coming in now to the medical system are aware of it and are addressing it. And unfortunately, a lot of them are really angry about it.
Yeah.
The thing we understand is that anger isn't going to solve this problem. It's only going to drive more distance. So we are in the midst of this weird space where we have an anger revolution and a hatred revolution and an awareness revolution, all packed. Yeah. We're having as soon as,
it's going to be a revolution.
Yeah, and it is somewhat. So how do we?
But well, I'm all about making love, not war. But the question is, that's a little bit to the other extreme too, because I think balance. Look, let's not get off target there, because that's like a whole nother discussion.
No, I mean, I just think it's really important for other people also to recognize that one of the things that inhibits our ability to see things is that culturally we've been told not to see them. And that
of course.
And so the more that we're able to kind of be aware of how those things formed, I think the better off we are.
So we're back to self-reflection and awareness and love and acceptance. And you'd think, well, how could this be, the medicine? And yet these are all chemical. Because I've been studying neuroplasticity, and I think John Sarno would be talking about neuroplasticity. He would have been interviewed in the Pain Brain, if he was alive. So
he was talking about it. He said you can change your brain.
Yeah.
I mean, he did. He was saying that.
Yeah. No, of course. In the way of like your unconscious mind and your unconscious mind. How was he saying it? I'm curious.
Well, he was talking about it was that these things are driven by the unconscious, and so you have to address that. Yeah. You can't. You journal and things come up, and it may not be exactly what it is. But what it does is it teaches your brain it's safe to explore these ideas. Yeah. And the more that you do that, you change your brain. Right. That was the process. You're writing in order to change your brain into a space of safety.
Right. He talked about the fight and flight mechanism, and that's what's driving your anxiety. That's what I wanted to say. Anxiety is not a bad thing. Gabriel Matai talks about this. David Hanscom talks about this. Anxiety is not a bad thing. Anxiety is another name for, well, when I cross the street, I'm going to stop at that red light. I mean, anxiety is another kind of awareness. It's just in an extreme, it's hurting us. In balance, it's keeping me aware. Is that fair to say?
Well, I think you don't have to. No, I mean, it's not so much anxiety. It's about a little bit of stress isn't a bad thing.
Right. Okay. Awareness
isn't a bad thing, but I think an overarching, unceasing thing. It's kind of like I have a new puppy that I'm learning a lot from, and I just saw something about like a trainer saying, once they're 1 year old, like 1.5 maybe, you should only be feeding them once a day. And it's because they need to have time for their body to process without processing food. So it's like doing the house cleaning. But if it's constantly processing the food, it can't ever catch up. And, a lot of humans know this to be true too. A lot of us don't eat until 1 or 2 because you want to let your body catch up. And then you don't eat too much after a certain point. You eat in a shorter time frame.
Michael, what does it have to do with anxiety?
What it has to do with, so I'm bringing it back to, is that it's what are the processes that allow you to clear that stuff out. So if you're constantly anxious, you never get to clear those chemicals. And so what happens with a gazelle, it gets chased, it has all those chemicals, it shakes it out, and it goes back to eating. And then it has time to clear those chemicals. It's that thing of like, it's the chronic and constantness of it that's the problem. Right.
And I had this discussion with someone. It was a sad discussion because she was working with somebody who was a lovely, lovely woman who had cancer, and she kept beating it and beating. I don't like. She kept healing from it and healing from it and healing from it. And this time she died from it. And the person said to me, she was like the most positive person I met. And how can you say that? And I'm saying exactly. It's not about the positiveness. So I want to talk about underneath that. People have this behavior of being positive, and I'm losing my train of thought when I get back to it.
They're not sitting with the other
right. It wasn't like she wasn't a beautiful, lovely person, but being so positive all the time is not balanced.
Right.
And so she could, that's what I mean. Like anxiety could be a way that we behave, and we're not really aware that we're behaving. We're not really into. Help me here, like.
Well, we're not being conscious or present with it. And so we're manifesting a lot of anxiety that we realize isn't socially acceptable. So we are not, what happens is we then repress it on one level while it's still there. So we haven't gotten rid of it. We just know that we're not supposed to show it to people. Right. Because that's not cool. It's not comfortable. It makes other people uncomfortable. So we're doing a lot of work to mask what we're truly feeling, rather than addressing what we're truly feeling.
Right. It's a very good answer. And when I interviewed Nicole Sachs on the show, I said, a lot of people don't really like journaling. They're not really, getting. She says, well, because they're lying to themselves. And that's it. That's what we're sort of saying. Like I always say, you got to come naked. You got to be emotionally naked with yourself. You got to know yourself. And even if you don't like that part of you're getting to know, you need to accept that.
Yeah. And or at least bring it into the light so you can address it. You don't necessarily have to accept it, but you have to accept that's what you're truly feeling, what you're truly thinking. Yeah. And if you don't, you don't.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, you're raising teenagers who are anxious. But they're sensitive. They're strong girls. They're strong women. They're living in the 21st century. I mean, I want to look at how you've evolved as a human being, as not only the star and the director of the movie, and had gone through your own process, that you're living your process. This is a journey. This is not like, oh, Michael, you're all better. You have no symptoms.
I have this disease
called being human.
Yeah.
Stop for how do you help your anxious teenagers? Your anxious.
Oh, I'm not very good at it.
Oh, honey, no.
Yeah, I can try.
Are you beating yourself up? Are you judging yourself?
Just saying, I just do what I can.
And that's just it. And everyone, when I say, are you doing the best you can? Yeah.
Well, you're always doing the best you can.
Right.
You can maybe do better, but you're doing the best you can at the moment.
Right. That's loving yourself.
It's accepting yourself, right? And accepting yourself is loving yourself,
Right.
All these things, they're both abstract and incredibly practical at the same time. And sometimes they don't feel real or we're doing it right until we do it enough that you're like, oh. I think I've told you this, but I was doing yoga for a whole year. And it took a year, and then I was like, oh. Because I wasn't, just wasn't even able to do certain things, like, when you're pulling one leg towards the other, or you're, pushing out with your foot but pulling in with your shoulder. So you're pushing your hand out but pulling in at the same time. These contradictory things. It's like, what do you mean? If you're pushing out with your hand, then you're pushing. Nope, you pull back with your shoulder and still push out with your hand. It takes a long time to figure out the complexity of that.
Yeah.
We're all this pulling in and that takes a lot more attention. And that attention is actually when you're really bringing your presence to those kind of matters, you're no longer thinking, oh, what do I have to do about dinner? And you interrupt that flow of nonsense. It's important to take care of, but that's why we have lists.
Yeah.
And we don't have to remind ourselves of things 100 times an hour.
Yeah. Would you say, Michael, that, I mean, I don't think there's anything new under the sun. I mean, even the Pain Brain movie, which I've been promoting in Israel, and I think it's phenomenal and I think it's amazing. And yet the Pain Brain movie did not show the difficult cases. It showed the cases that, you know, and many responded, and it's an amazing movie. But, you know, for the people that are on their journey, and I would just like to say, and I'd like to get an answer from you, we really have to just continue getting better at feeling, and then we'll feel better. But there's really nothing new that's going to come out that we haven't really addressed here.
I think we have to get better at sitting.
Sitting. I like that. Patience. Would you call that patience with oneself?
Just not even going to the whole realm of like, because patience is kind of in the judgment. Just sitting, and it's. But
hard. Michael, I'm in pain. I have symptoms.
So, feel them, and they may get louder for a minute. But if you listen and just sit with them, you know what? They start to feel heard. And when the symptoms feel heard, they stop to feel as stop feeling as necessary. And
so listening to yourself, accepting yourself, loving yourself, compassion for oneself.
But all of it a little bit less actively. Right?
A little less actively.
Right. So it's kind of like the hardest thing for me in yoga was not pushing too hard, because I push too hard. I do way too much. I work way too hard at everything. So for me to do, oh, God, I'm really pushing too hard to get, like, I feel like I should be able to do, just take it easy. And so the idea of sitting is like, so once we decide we're going to heal, maybe we work too hard at it. And if we recognize maybe that we work really hard and we push, sit with that. Listen to it.
I love it.
And it doesn't mean it's going to go away. It doesn't mean you'll be able to address it right away. But once you start, rubbing a little bit of dirt off the mirror, you start to see a little more clearly.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's profound. And, like I say, when the student is ready, the teacher will come. But when the student is really ready, they don't need a teacher.
Right. So, well, when the student is ready, they often remember what the teacher said.
Right.
Yeah.
And that they're their own teacher, And so I always love having you on the show, and always love your advice and your wisdom, and your stories always paint a thousand words. And really, you're still writing beautiful things on Facebook, and they're all very meaningful and profound when you write. There's lots of wisdom. So if anybody wants to hear more from Michael, they can join the All the Rage page, or it's mostly
really engaging, because that's one of the interesting things about our culture too, is like Facebook will do this stuff where it'll beg you to be involved and make you want to do it, or tell you that, oh, if you do this a lot, then you'll build an audience. But then they just stop showing it to anybody. So it's just like, okay, I'm actually not going to do that. So I mostly just do it on Instagram. Sometimes on All the Rage, sometimes on the Rumor Picks one.
Okay.
But it's like I have enough to do that I don't need to be worried about building an audience. I just do it. I try to do it simply and not overdo it.
Do you think you'll do another movie around anything around chronic pain or the mind body?
No, I think the next thing is definitely going to be it'll be connected, but it's the donor conception adoption
story about that's beautiful. It's beautiful. That would be a beautiful story about relationships.
It is. It is a beautiful story about all kinds of different relationships.
Yeah.
It's already shot. It's just I need the time and
wow. Because I would love for people to hear about, I learned from you. I learned from you just from our shows and from interacting with you. If we can have a healthy relationship with our body and our emotions, I mean, that's the healing journey.
It is. And but sometimes it's really helpful to have a healthy relationship with our family too. You know,
of course.
And so,
of course, but when you're healthy with yourself, then it can happen with everyone else.
Right. So like I had done a lot of work by the time I met Holly, my older daughter, and
yeah,
so that really facilitated a lot of really good connection.
No, it's beautiful, that story, and you need to tell that it will be your greatest audience. So until we meet again,
yeah.
Really happy. It's been a little over an hour, and there's a bunch of you watching. Any questions out there before I say goodbye? But I think if anybody ever has a question for you, they can always send it to me or
or just you can message me on All the Rage page. I will get those messages.
Wonderful. No, you're very active and responsive on Facebook, even though you have a little dance with it. And anyway, so until we meet again, which we will, I'm blessed to be on the other end of this camera with you. And you helped me so much years ago when you said to me, Tova, stop being a victim. Remember when I called you and you were like, stop being a whiny victim. Stop being a damsel in distress, you said to me.
Well, I think it started when I was visiting you. I was like, wait, I'm noticing this pattern here. Let me help you see this.
Because I was complaining. And the beautiful thing is I've used that word before. So it's like a pattern, but I'll always be a little damsel in distress, but it's part of me and it won't have to hurt me anymore.
Right. Well, I would say it's less present. Yeah. It's not in charge.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate that. And I'm grateful to you for that. And anyway, so from my heart and home to your heart and home, all my love to you and your girls and that dog of yours. What a precious dog.
It's really
and what a nice relationship with that pooch. And we'll see you again. And thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Sure.
Okay. God bless. Good night, everybody. Okay.